Welcome to Mastering Finance, the podcast. My name is Nicholas Higgs.
And my name is Jarrell Hall.
And we have an excellent episode for you today. We'll be discussing how to create a great business plan. And we have two guests with us today to discuss it. Phyllice Bethel, business consultant, and we have Nathaniel Butler, managing principal of Drewber Solutions. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we all understand the importance of a business plan and how it affects lives. But please tell us a little bit about your experience in creating business plans. Phyllice?
So back in 2015, I was working for a venture capitalist who's also a certified financial analyst. A number of entrepreneurs would approach him for funding, but they didn't have a business plan. So because I was working for him, it was my job to put their business ideas on paper so he could decide whether or not he would invest. And so that's what got me started with writing business plans.
So I had a similar experience as well. I used to work for a corporate service administrator back in 2011. And so for persons who are coming into the country for the second home market and international investors, they have to present plans to the Bahamas Investment Authority. And so that was my training ground in creating plans. However, since then, dealing with the local market is completely different. It's a unique experience.
Well, this is an interesting episode because all four of us write business plans for small, medium, and large companies. So, Jeremy, how did you get into business plan writing?
For me, it was just writing my own plan for my own business, right? And so that's how I pretty much got into it. I mean, obviously, from a, call it academic perspective, I have an MBA, and so that's sort of one of the things you have to kind of do. But coming outside of academia, I was writing my own business plan, right? After having an idea, obviously. And so that's how I got into it, just writing it myself, and then obviously, presenting it to try to get funding, which I did, but went through several different processes, which we'll probably talk about in this episode, to kind of fine tune it and get it to exactly where it needed to be.
Yeah. And my way, I learned the reverse. As an analyst, I was kind of judging plans, judging numbers and what companies were doing. And so just learning from there, I started to realize what should be in there, what shouldn't be in there, how it should be presented, because how I received it for the funding at the time. So at the end of the day, we're all excellent at crafting business plans. And so to start off with a guess, what is a business plan? Let's start to the heart of it. What is a business plan? Jarrell?
So a business plan for me, very simply put, it's a tool, right? It's a tool to show you exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, who you're going to do it with, and what resources you need.
Correct.
And so for the biggest question that we've been asked a lot is, are business plans still relevant today? A lot of persons say you shouldn't do business plans anymore. They're bureaucratic. They're just trying to slow you down.
Yep.
They're holding you back from executing your vision. So Nathaniel, let's start with you. Are business plans still relevant?
Listen to me. I would say business plans are relevant when it comes down to getting financing or funding.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. But outside of that, I would not start off with a business plan. Because when you start off with the meat of a business plan and you're not even sure the direction of the idea you haven't even tested the idea you have, going full force into a plan is a little bit cumbersome. You know what I mean? So I would recommend that, you should start off with just concept. Test it out first. Then you have the meat or you have the statistics to now build out the plan. You get what I'm saying?
I agree. So Phyllice, do you feel they're still relevant?
So yes, I do believe business plans are relevant simply because you can have a great idea in your head, and sometimes these ideas can sound wonderful, but when you put them down on paper, when you start thinking about your customers and you match your customer with the product, then you start to recognize discrepancies between the two. So for me, writing a plan is just fleshing out your ideas on paper and making sure that it makes sense, not just to you, but to anybody else who reads the plan.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I was kind of teeter-tottering for a few years on this, but what I came to realize is I think a plan is necessary, right? Because I think it's easy to just kind of jump right into an idea and start to get it done, but here's the sort of wall that I bump into mentally when I talk to persons. If you don't have the patience, if you don't have the ability to want to spend the time in investing in your business at that level, then from an operational standpoint, from a practical standpoint, you're going to fall apart, right? Because it's going to get difficult, right? But if you don't have a guideline to say, this is what we think is going to happen, and then you have articulated in that plan scenario A, scenario B, scenario C, and then all the gray areas in between, then when it happens to you in actuality, you hit up against a wall and you just crumble. You don't make it.
And I think too, people should think of their business plan as something to hold yourself accountable to, and others to hold you accountable. Because if you have your sales target saying, I'm going to be generating $5,000 in sales per month, and then in actuality you're only generating $3,000, then there's that discrepancy. How do you get to the 5,000 that you projected? So I use it as an accountability measurement. If I'm meeting with a client, I do the same thing. Your target said you'd be at 5,000, you're only at 3,000. What's happening in your business that's causing you not to meet your target?
Agreed. If someone's building a home and you're going to the bank, you have to have a plan of how you plan to execute it, the benchmarks you will achieve for them to give you the next tranche of money to get up to the next level. So simply if you're doing that for your home or your apartment, how are you not doing that for your business of which you are potentially seeking equity for or debt for? It's a roadmap. So a lot of patients look at business plans as bureaucratic. You're just wasting my time. I got to write this document for so long. Not as much information is available in the market, but it is critical for your business for you to take on loans, take out equity, or take out your own personal funds. You should have a plan, something that says I should achieve this quarterly, achieve this monthly, or achieve this weekly. This is the process I must follow. And so to our listeners, it is critical for your business to have a business plan, no matter what stage it's at, a startup, existing, whether you're a small, medium, or large business, you have to have some type of roadmap. And so now we get to the heart of it. There are numerous types of plans. You have a full-fledged business plan, you have a lean plan, one-page plan, you have operational plans, expansion plans. How do you differentiate, or do you use one structure for all? How do you differentiate when you look at a client? What should a client be looking at? Maybe they should just do a pitch deck. How do you decide when a client approaches you, or you see someone who needs to develop their business at each stage, which plan do you recommend, or how do you decide what they should use?
I think it's based on the need. It's based on the need and who's the plan for. As we were discussing in the last segment, it's a tool, but it's a communication tool, And so if I'm taking this to an investor, then I know I need my business plan and I need a pitch deck. If we're talking about expansion, or if we're talking about just the management team with an annual review, then we might need to look at putting together an annual plan. So it all depends on what the need is and who we're gonna share the information with. And that will determine what components need to be put inside it, what components need to be left out.
Exactly. So just like Nathaniel said, it depends on the client and what their need is. I've had clients who approached me simply because they wanted to secure a contract. And so in helping them to put together a sales proposal, I had to do all of the research into their business, understand what services they're offering, documented all of what they're looking to offer their partner. And once the sales proposal was done, the next step was just to add financials, and then it was a business plan. So it really depends on what they need.
No, I was just going to say that I think that's important to make that sort of delineation in terms of, there not being one plan that covers the whole gamut, right? You have different types of plan like you were talking about. And I think it's also important to understand your why too, right? I mean, even when you talk about the types of business plans, because you need to know like what is the purpose of it, right? Is it for the long term? Is it 5? Is it 10, 20 years out, 5 years out? Is it for a specific contract? And so I think it's important for our audience to know that depending on what it is you're doing will determine the type of plan you need to have.
And so the client now recognizes the plan that they want, that they need for what their goal is. I think we were talking about this kind of offline before we started the shoot. When should a client start actually writing the plan? I have this idea in my mind, there's concepts, I want to do this. Should they just start writing the plan, or what should a client do before they actually start writing the plan? At what point should there be?
Should they write it?
Yeah, so then it goes to who should be writing the plan. But at what point does an idea become something that should be a plan now, or whether it's an existing business I want to expand? At what point do you say someone should start actually putting pen to paper?
I think when they get to the point where they really want to invest money behind it, if you're going to put resources, whether it's your own or someone else, you're going to need a plan. You're going to need to know how much of your resources you're going to put in, how much of the other person's resources you're going to put in it. And for most of us, if you've never had formal training in preparing a plan, then the next step is let's get our ideas down. What is the concept we're trying to achieve here? Once that is done, now we can take it to someone who's professional at putting these things together. Because what's going to happen is there's going to be a series of questions. Question A, question B, question C, for them to build out the plan for you. You get what I'm saying? But I've seen in a lot of cases where persons may have a portion of an idea and they may see a little bit of an opportunity and haven't really fully fleshed it out. And then they bring that to you, and now you have to kind of fill in the gaps. And so instead of creating something that is specific to them, you create something that is generic and standard. And then when it's time to bring that into reality, you find that there's some gaps in there, all because it's not specific to them. And sometimes you have to sit them down and slow persons down and say, okay, let's look at this. Let's develop this a little bit more. But you know, sometimes when there is resources available and opportunities, some people feel like, wait,
Yeah.
I will
Yes.
be patient. I want it and I want it now.
Yeah.
I agree with you, and discipline is critical. Yeah, as you mentioned, resources. If I'm going to now spend my time on this plan, spend money on a writer, or even spend my nights on this, I have to be dedicated to this. I find a lot of persons sometimes, this is just a great topic in my mind. I know this could be a great idea, so now I'm going fast. And then after 3 months of hard work, you know, another thing now gives me a dopamine rush, and now I'm going to do that plan over there. And so now you're a serial plan writer. You're putting these ideas, and persons come to you with 10 plans. I have all these ready, you know, and none of them are fully fleshed out, fully developed. And so, Phyllice, similar for you.
Yeah, so like I have friends who are entrepreneurs. So the lady who does my hair, I'd just be sitting in her chair and just out of curiosity, I remember we were going through COVID, and I said, so who's your target customer? And she said, well, everybody. And so I was like, you sure about that? And it wasn't until she went through the worst part of the pandemic that she came back and said, well, I know who my target customer is, professional women, because even during COVID, they needed to be on these virtual meetings. So they always needed their hair done, whereas everybody else fell aside because that, you know, having their hair done wasn't a priority. And so I would say, even before you sit down and try to write a plan, is first understand your business.
Correct.
Understand who your customers are. Yeah. Understand what is most important to them and how your products or services are catering to that specific need. Because then when you sit down to write a plan, either by yourself or with a consultant, you're coming with a clear idea. This is what my business does, and that is why my business is important, because it caters to this specific client. Now I just need help in terms of attracting more clients like this specific person, and I need this amount of funding in order to do that.
So I'd like to ask, when it comes to that, I've seen, as you mentioned, if I'm a startup, I've never been in this business before, I don't work in this industry, how can I do that without necessarily the plan?
Research.
You have to do the research.
Yeah.
Market research. So with another young lady, I simply asked her, I said, how often do women get their makeup done professionally? So she said, maybe 5 times a year. I said, do you really believe that? And so she said, yes. So I created a survey monkey thing for her. She sent out the survey to random women, maybe about 100 plus women, and the answer came back maybe once a year that women would, the average woman, not, you know, some women obviously get their makeup done more frequently, but the average woman is waiting on a really special occasion. For a woman, that could be a birthday, or it could be an anniversary or a wedding, exactly. And so if she was to go and borrow money on the premise that the average woman is getting her makeup done 5 times a year, she would be completely mistaken, because that isn't the idea. So I said, okay, if the average woman is only getting her makeup done once a year, what does that say to you? That your business, your future business, can be based on one-off makeup services. You need to offer maintenance services that's going to keep them coming back. Maintenance services like getting their lashes done, getting their brows done, or waxing. Those are the things that are going to keep them coming back over time. But I would always say observe the market, survey the market, and the market will tell you exactly what it is that you need to be doing.
And that's why, guys, I think, like we talked about in the beginning, when I was talking about the definition of a business plan, that's why I call it a tool. And the reason why is because it forces the entrepreneur, the person who's coming up with the idea, to truly, it forces them to think about what it is they want to do. That exercise that you just went through in completing a business plan, going through, call it the market analysis section, where you're going and really defining that target market, that's probably one of the most important parts of the plan, because your financials are based on it, right? Yeah. Everything is based around who is this avatar, this customer that you're going after. What value are you going to bring to them that they are willing to pay for? Exactly. That's going to make sense for the entrepreneur. So I think that's an excellent point.
Not only that too, also I would go to a point where I say, well, what makes you different from persons who are already in the space providing the same service?
Exactly.
Right.
So that's a big part of writing the plan. So when I was working for that venture capitalist, I was a secret shopper for every client that he had. So, okay, you're in the electrical supply space. I'm going to check out all of the major competitors who offer electrical supplies. I'm going to see, okay, who has modern supplies, who have outdated supplies. Like, you have to actually go and check out the market. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs have this notion, or they want to believe that what they're doing is so special and innovative that they don't need to watch what anybody else is doing. That is a big lie.
And the business plan, a good business plan will humble you. No matter what you think your numbers are going to do, a business plan will humble you. To your point, there was an entrepreneur who wanted information about little trinkets. So they went to the mall for about 2-3 weeks, and they would just stand outside and count how many persons came with small bags versus large bags. The large bags weren't relevant, but the smaller bags, you had to be a small trinket in there, maybe a little small thing. And so for 2 weeks, it is. So they went there. They went to there's a few shops in the mall they went to. I don't want to say, but that's how they got information before they started even putting pen to paper, just to see, okay, what kind of volume are you seeing, what kind of market is there. And so you have to gather information. So even before you start your plan, you have to put some thought into it before you really start putting your money in there, your time and resources in. But when does someone look at a plan and say it's viable? Can someone know it's an idea is viable before they start writing the plan? Or do they find it out in the plan writing? I found that there are examples of both. And so how do you guide an entrepreneur through that process? So are you sitting with them and you're looking at them and say, you know what, this plan has no legs. There's no way this idea can work. Or are you still going to write a plan for somebody whose idea you think is not viable? Or would you say, I'm not going to take that business? How do you work through this is a startup company, a new idea? How should this entrepreneur be addressing it's time to pay somebody to do this plan?
I think the greater challenge is, and you said something that I just smile at, whereas research will humble you. So with startups, I hate startups, first and foremost, because
really?
I hate it. I'd rather deal with an existing business. I'd rather deal with an existing business.
And
because
this is on the business plan side, or is this on the full consultancy side?
No, this is on the business plan side. Now, after you get the plan sorted out as a startup and you're getting your money, then I have no problem working with you. But in regards to dealing with a startup, because startups attract a whole litany of persons, right? Somebody who's experienced, somebody who's not, somebody who's been in an industry, somebody who's going into a new industry, have no knowledge about how the industry works. For example, when you shared your story, I could recall of a particular entrepreneur a group of entrepreneurs wanting to introduce this particular beverage into the Bahamas market. So, my thing to them was, we created the survey, and we created two actually. One for the consumers, the other one's for the carriers, like the shops would carry the beverage. Right. And I told them, go into the shops. At first I didn't realize a lot of persons are uncomfortable being uncomfortable. So you have to kind of hold their hand through the process. We talked to many of the shop owners, And they told us up front, they gave us their feedback from owning their store and what they've seen work and what doesn't work. That particular beverage would not work.
Yeah.
Now, should we go? I already got the money.
So
You understand what I'm saying?
So you look executed.
And now the entrepreneur, in their mind is like, no, this could work, this could work. So we went to takeouts. And the takeout company said, well, there was a particular group of takeout companies that said, well, yeah, this could definitely work for us. Well, when you look at the type of people who they attract persons who are coming from different places where they have tasted the beverage, they have seen the beverage. It can't work in every takeout, but this particular group that targets this particular target market, it could have worked. The problem with the entrepreneurs was they saw their product mainstream, meaning it being everywhere.
That's an important point. But I gotta say, what I find in speaking to persons who I did plans for and just sort of researching, reading articles on entrepreneurs, most entrepreneurs, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong because you're more intimately involved with this than I am, but is it that you find that most entrepreneurs believe that whatever they're wanting to present to the market should be for everyone, and they're afraid to niche down and be specific?
I find that a lot. And the way I help entrepreneurs with that is I say, okay, the way you speak to a 20-year-old is very different than the way you speak to a 40-year-old or a 60-year-old.
Right.
So when you come up with your marketing campaigns, your social media platforms, there has to be a specific person or maybe a 15-year age range that you're speaking to, because otherwise you're going to sound schizophrenic.
Yes.
So let's make a choice.
Yeah.
Who are you speaking to? That should not only be spoken to in your business plan, but also in all of your customer touch points, your social media platforms, your website. Because if you're going to talk to me about, let's say, fashion, you have to present something to me that says, I only carry 1 or 2 sizes of a particular dress. You can sell me on the fact that you offer convenience services, so maybe on Sundays your store doesn't open to the public, but I would have the chance to come in for an hour or 2, see your inventory before everyone comes in. So you have to know what your customer really wants, who you're speaking to. And I think what entrepreneurs don't realize a lot of times is that their business is a personality.
Yes.
It has an identity.
Yes, for sure.
And that identity has to resonate with a customer who shares
Correct.
similar values.
Exactly. Correct.
So you can't, everybody doesn't have your values. Everybody won't identify with your personality. So choose a personality, choose who you are targeting, and go with that.
I would say to Phyllice's points, first time entrepreneurs, they won't cater to everyone. Second time entrepreneurs who have some level of success, then it's all about the product for them. Third time entrepreneurs, what I've found, who have 2 successful business to some level of degree, they're focused on distribution. So the conversation differs after gaining some level of experience where there's failure and then also some level of success as well. That they're more open to, okay, how do I minimize this failure? How do we capitalize on the success? How do we reduce the mistakes?
And the thing is too, even if, because some entrepreneurs are stubborn and they may say, okay, I still want to cater to everybody, right? The question then is, do you have the resources to cater to everyone?
Yeah. So,
Can you?
Yeah.
and that carries us to a very important question. There's entrepreneurs where they're existing or they're thinking of this new business, they're listening to this right now, and they're wondering, who is the person I should choose to help write my plan? Is it myself? Is it I should pay a consultant? You see there are AI now writing plans. Some persons are using Fiverr or going to countries such as India, the US, seeking out their plans written. How do you measure? What's your advice to someone who's trying to craft this plan, whether it's a startup or existing, and they're trying to figure out which one they should utilize? How does someone decide that? What's your thoughts?
First, I think everyone is capable of writing a business plan. However, everyone should appreciate that writing a business plan is both an art and a science.
Correct. 100%.
And there are few people who have the ability to be both an artist and a scientist. But at the end of the day, writing the business plan is about telling your story, saying the background of your business, how you got started, who the customers are, why these customers are important to you, how you're going to support these customers with your products, your services, who the members of your team are. It's telling that story, right? But at the same time, you're not always the best person to tell your story, because sometimes when I sit down with a client and I say, tell me about your business, they tell me about their business. But it isn't until I start asking questions 10 to 20 that all this other information comes out that they didn't even know was important. And I'm like, well, that's what you need to highlight in your business plan. So I would say anyone who is contemplating whether or not they should write a business plan, my first thing would say, reach out to a consultant, maybe not thinking about, okay, I'm going to choose this consultant to write my plan, but meet with them, see how they engage with you, see what they're able to pull out of you, and then decide, okay, is this the person I want to collaborate with to write my plan?
I think for me, and I totally agree with everything. I think you're building, and the foundation is going to come from you. So there's a component where you have to document something.
Yeah.
And I would say the concept of it, like we talk about, all right, who's the market? What are you going to provide to them? You know, what is the value you're bringing? And then from there, and this is the biggest of all, how are you going to make money?
Yeah.
Let's talk about this business model of yours, right? How are you going to make money? Once you have those core points documented, then it's a question of sitting down with the professionals. And I know we like to take the approach of we want the maximum reward, but we want to pay the cheapest price.
Yeah.
And so we go to these avenues that provide us with a cheap outlet, right? And you get an inferior product. If you're serious about your business, you need to make sure that the persons who you're going to engage understand the market and the economy that you're in. Because some economies, there's a lot of information. But in other industries or markets, it's limited information. So you need somebody who's skillful enough to gather all of the data that is needed to comprise this document that can be accepted by all of the stakeholders who are going to touch this living document.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention here, if we stick up in here, is to mention that the business plan essentially serves as that entrepreneur's first investment in their business, right? And I think it's incumbent on that individual or individuals to be willing to make that investment, meaning that, like Nathaniel just alluded to, you know, you have an option here where someone can write you a plan for a few $100s versus a few $1,000s, right? And what's the delta between those two, right? And I think we're talking about those things now, right? Being able to flesh out the idea, understand the reasons why, understand the target market, and just really nail down what it is we're trying to do. And I think for Nick, I think when you think about how you look at business plans, for example, how you view businesses, right? How much value do you place on an entrepreneur who writes the business plan themselves versus the one that does not?
That's an amazing question, right? I don't differentiate necessarily once the entrepreneur understands it. So someone else could have wrote that plan for that person. They get the most beautiful plan, but the entrepreneur has no idea what's in that plan. Right. Someone pretty much took their idea and crafted an actual good plan, and so you sit down with them, they have no information. For me, it's how much information do you understand that plan? So first, is it a good quality plan? That's the first metric, so that passes that stage. Then two, how much of this plan is actually you versus your writer? So if it's you who wrote this excellent plan, I mean, that's just an A+. It's a good day, right? But even if you didn't write the plan, if you can speak to that extremely well. So sorry, Phyllice, I'm going to say your stuff. So Phyllice drills the plan into their memory. And so the clients, no, she drills it. I'll give you an example. There was a time we did a pitch before, and I'm sitting inside the room waiting on the pitches to happen, and no one's coming in. I walk outside, Phyllice has them like on the yard. It's like, what's your return earnings? What's your profitability? Yeah, how much it costs? Break down your break-even point. And the entrepreneur is sitting there sweating 10%, 20%. And so they understand. So I know Phyllice's artistic style has done that plan.
Right.
But I understand that
That's
she's
awesome.
made, the entrepreneur takes it as just important, that information that's in that plan, as the writer. And so that's a very good question. And so it depends on how much the entrepreneur knows and understands it.
And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of entrepreneurs know how to make the product, how to offer the service, but they have no idea how many products they need to make in order to break even.
Correct.
How many services. So that is something you have to teach them. And if you're going to a pitch with CFA, you need to be able to say what your net profit margin is. I'm sorry.
CFA, binder, lawyer,
yes, you need to be certain, and that's the thing. You have to prepare them to use certain vocabulary.
Yes.
An investor, banker is going to ask, what's your net profit margin? You need to know what that means, and you have to explain that to them. Okay, this is what that is. If they're looking at your financials, if you're going to a particular financial institution, I know who some of the decision makers are. And if you don't have waste management as a line item in your profit and loss, I'm not pointing any fingers.
No.
But that's part of preparing your client.
Yeah, you're right. No, listen to me. I totally agree with you. I totally agree. Because I've seen situations where, well, let me scale it back. Shark Tank, Dragon's Den.
Yeah.
This franchise has introduced the business language to a lot of persons who want to get in business but may have never been exposed to it. You understand what I'm saying? Think about it. Our normal formal education, you're not doing any presentations in front of the class about profit and loss statements and that kind of thing. So, and that's good. You need that. But on the other side of the spectrum, what I've discovered is that many of the entrepreneurs never take the time out to understand the plan so that they can communicate the plan. And many of them feel that once the document is final, I don't even need to read the plan. How many entrepreneurs have you dealt with have never even read their own business plan?
A lot. A lot. So to the audience, it is critical for you to have a business plan. No matter what stage you're at, if you're looking for money, if you're looking to expand, it could depend, you could do different types of business plans, but it is critical for you to have a business plan. It's important for you to understand your information and to choose a good person to write your plan, whether it's yourself, whether it's someone else, whether it's using someone out of your country, within the country. Make sure the quality is there. That doesn't mean the plan needs to cost $15,000, $20,000. It doesn't also mean it needs to cost $250. And so whether you're starting a dock, a marina, or a manufacturing plant, or something small as a hot dog stand, you should have some form of plan to make sure that you yourself, not only that your funding is one part, but you yourself understand your business. No one's going to fund your business if you don't even understand your business. A lot of it, as we know, is the person. As soon as some person look at their plan, they look at who is the management. Who are these persons? And so this part of the show is to make sure you understand how important, even before you start writing your plan, is. You have to understand that. And so we're now going to go into actually the business plan structure, the template of it. And so one of the first thing every entrepreneur will see is the executive summary. That's the first thing they should be working on, or that's the summary of it. And so Jarrell, just break it down for us, the executive summary for our listener.
The executive summary, so here's my approach. So I typically do the executive summary at the end. Right? And the reason why is because it's just an aggregate of everything else that I do, right? So the executive summary is something that's crucially important, but it's the byproduct of everything else that you do in a plan. And I think it's important for entrepreneurs to realize that. So although you may see it first, it's the byproduct of everything else. Just like you go on Instagram, for example, and you see this one's driving a fancy car and they're a business owner, and that one has a nice something and they're a business owner. That's potentially the byproduct of everything else that they've done over time. And I think that's the same approach you take to the executive summary.
And so I was supposed to say the first thing the funder sees is the executive summary. So now writing a plan, as you say, is an aggregate. How do you address the executive summary? For me, it has to be concise. It can't be a long rambles. It also can't be too short where someone doesn't understand it. So a person should leave understanding your products, your services. They should understand where you are located or where this concept is supposed to be. They should have a quick glance of what this market is, how there's an opportunity that you are benefiting from.
Right.
And so, please, for your side, when you're crafting these executive summaries, what are you looking at? What should our listener really take away when they're finally completed their plan, and how should the executive summary be presented?
So similar to what you and Jarrell already said, and I would even go so far to say for many investors, bankers, the executive summary and the financials are the only sections of the plan that most people look at.
That's what they
So your executive summary has to say enough that would help them to decide whether or not this is something that they want to invest in. Now, it doesn't mean that you just write nonsense in the other sections, but if they have certain questions related to your pricing strategy, then they can just look in that particular section if that's their question.
Correct.
But your executive summary should be written so well that somebody can make a decision looking at that and your financials and decide, okay, this is a viable business.
Yeah, to your point, you have, if you're going to a commercial bank, they may be looking at a good amount of plans, a week, a month, and so they don't have time to read your 200-page plan. And so
I think we need an episode on how long should the business plan be.
So yes, I know we're on executive summary, but that's a good point. How long should a business plan be, or how long should a business plan not be?
I would say
Can't be 2 pages.
even with
That's a good start.
even with your financial projections, aim to have your plan between 20 to 25 pages.
Even with your projections,
Even with your projections,
including the notes.
you have to be concise and precise. Like you said, the average banker investor is looking at dozens of plans every day.
Yeah.
And so who has the time to sit down and read 50 pages of your one document? And not only that, even if they said, you know what, I want to read this plan from start to finish, think about the number of interruptions that's going to come. And so their thoughts are completely disconnected when it relates to your plan. So if you write something concisely, 20 pages, including graphics, and I think that is another thing that a lot of writers or entrepreneurs discount. People like to visualize.
Correct.
A picture tells 1,000 words. If you can show what your product actually looks like, that helps you to trim down from 1,000 to maybe 10 words in describing your product. How many products you need to sell, because somebody could look at it and say, "Oh, I would buy this."
Yeah.
So I could relate to 100 people are going to buy this on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So I would say keep your plans 20 pages, 25 pages the most.
And do you think that
And stop being repetitive.
Oh,
Don't
yeah.
say the same thing
Yeah.
1,000 times.
Throughout the whole plan.
and do you think
Sorry, listener, you're getting the truth. You're getting the truth.
you really are.
So, Jarrell,
But Phyllice, do you think that template, I guess we can call it, is applicable for every business type at every stage, or would it vary depending?
Let's
in
give a
case you have
hotel.
business that may have a
a
bigger
hotel, a
businesses or
casino,
hotels or casinos
or a new entity, or a new concept for a country that's never had it before.
No, I think it would be.
I approach every
I
plan
think
the
it would,
same way.
No, I think it would be extended because of the type of business. Because some may have, for example, I could think of some business plans that would need a environmental assessment report attached to it, so that extends
That's
it.
a supplement.
Yeah, the supplemental document.
Exactly.
I could think of some other plans they may need other components just to get a license to go along with the
Exactly.
plan. But for the most part, I'm in agreement with the length.
So I agree with the length as well. Mine are usually between 25 to 35 pages. I really never want to go over 50. So 25 to 35 pages is where I go to. In certain plans that require more detailed operational plans or safety manuals, those wouldn't be in the plan. That would be an addendum too, and it'd be right to the side of supporting information. But your core information, what your person is reading, it shouldn't be extremely long and repetitive. Your executive summary and your financial, Phyllice said, that will pass you the sniff test. For sure, if I have interest, I'm going to end up reading your full plan mostly. But for sure, if that I'm looking at that executive summary, I'm turning to the company page to see who is running this company, and I'm going straight to the financials, use of proceeds. That's what I'm really looking at very early on. And that's the main core of what I'm looking at when I did my first analysis.
The thing is that I think is important to mention too, whatever you document in your business plan, it has to be true. So if you say that your products are selling like crazy on a particular grocery store shelf or whatever, investors, bankers are going to take the time to go and check the store, and if it's not there, your whole plan is discredited.
Yeah.
Agreed. And so I hope everyone is really taking the executive summary. Very critical for us. And so normally next for me, and as we go through this process, we'll get everyone's personality of how they structure their plans. Me, I'm showing the company next. Who the company is. You should already understand what the company does from the executive summary. But then who is in the company, who's the CEO, who's the president. So smaller companies, just the shareholders are usually the persons managing as well.
Yeah.
But to get an understanding of who this business is, what normally are you doing next, and how are you usually addressing those? Jarrell, how do you usually handle those?
I mean, look, this particular part is important, right? Because lots of times, and even like companies that I've put money behind or had interest in, it's always about the people, right?
Yes.
And my whole criteria of how I weight how much I'm going to be interested in the company is who are the people behind it. Because if I can understand the people, the experience they have, experience they don't have, any of their sort of complementary attributes between the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5 of them, that tells me a lot about what the business is going to produce. And so that's the part that I typically have there next.
So some plans, you're a startup plan. I'm going to throw out some scenarios. I may be developing this concept, but I don't have a CFO yet. I don't have I don't want to run this company, I'm just crafting this and I'll find a CEO. I don't have this at the time of crafting the business plan. Is that a concern for you? Should I have picked my persons, or I should know who I would like to use? Or can it just be me, myself, crafting this plan alongside you, just putting together job descriptions and we find those persons later? How do you fill out that area for startup businesses, existing businesses?
That's a good
How are you
question.
looking at that?
Okay, and I want to go back to your first question in terms of if I would put that right after the executive summary. I tend to leave that information right before the financial projections, simply because we live in a very small island nation, and sometimes when people see who the movers and shakers behind the business, they just have a mental block right there, and they don't read the rest of the plan, right? But then to the second question, even if you have not identified a particular person to be your human resources director, you can state what that role entails and what they'd be responsible for. And you can have a target date to say, well, this is when this director would be employed, and that would tie into your projections, because then you'd see when this salary, kicks in. But you don't have to have everybody employed, identified. You want to start your business as lean as possible.
Say it again.
Start your business as lean as possible, and when the business can afford you onboarding employees, consultants, then you do that.
No, I totally agree. I think the company section for me is more on the standing of where the business is located, because we have a lot of people, great companies, and we don't know where the thing is situated.
Yes, exactly.
But to your point, even in regards to personnel, I've had a situation where a boutique hotel, right, investors bringing in their money at $3 million. I was turned down simply because of the financial institution at the time. The relationship officer who was processing it did not include in their discussion paper who the executives were going to be to run it. And the owner didn't have the experience in hospitality. They came from a completely different industry. They had the financing, they had the money, they had the parking. But, and they were hiring Bahamians to run it. But that critical component was left out and the plan was rejected. And then once it was resubmitted through another officer and they put it in, they got approved. So it's critical. So I say that to say, sometimes our cousin, our friend, and our family member, they may not always be the best. I know you got to start where you can, but let's try to get quality over quantity. because quantity can kill your business if you don't have the cash flow to sustain the business in the initial beginning.
And that's a very good point because there was a restaurant developed before and they had all this staff. It was just full-fledged staff everywhere. You knew for sure every order was going to be taken care of very quickly. But the company still had to build a brand. They didn't have a brand, and the amount of staff they hired just buried the company. They were just completely, and also the CEO, because he crafted his plan, put the money behind it, he didn't want to put his hand in the actual restaurant, so he just wants to be the orchestrator. So when his company just starting, he should have been in that company. Instead, he was paying other persons and just money's leaving the company. So even when you're crafting your plan, we know it's going to be beautiful, but when you get into actually executing on it, you have to look at how much are you going to do it as best as possible. You got to help your company and be as lean as possible, as you mentioned. Lean. It can't just be everybody you thought about. It can't just be there. And so we want to shift from, we did the executive summary, we've done the company description, but more importantly now we're getting into the very hard part,
Nitty-gritty.
market analysis. How does someone handle market analysis in a community where not as much data is available or sometimes not as shared at times? What have you found in your experience when it comes to gathering information for startup companies, companies seeking to expand, or completely new concepts in the community? How do you get market data?
For a lot of clients, I help them create that data by conducting surveys. So they can simply survey customers in Starbucks or companies similar to Starbucks. They teach us that all the time. When you walk through the door, somebody asks you, when was the last time you were here? How much did you spend? What do you like about the service? Would you come again? All of that is gathering data. And so I encourage startups to do the same. Also, if you want more information on competitors, so obviously you can't walk into a competitor's business and ask questions. This is where I would say that you should enroll with the Small Business Development Center. The Small Business Development Center also offers business plan writing services, and writers there, reviewers, investment committee members, they would have access to market data. And so if there are deficiencies in your plan in that particular area, those deficiencies can be addressed just based on the data that they have available.
No, I totally agree. I think between the Small Business Development Center and then you look at the Chamber of Commerce, and then there's some statistics also made available by the government and the Ministry of Finance and some of the properties that fall under finance, like the Department of Inland Revenue, statistics, et cetera, et cetera.
And even though international data is a lot of times very different than local data, what I like to look at in international data is emerging trends in a certain industry.
Correct.
And so if you're noticing internationally that the medical and beauty industries are now starting to merge,
Correct.
then when you have an entrepreneur who's in the beauty space, you're able to ask them certain questions or direct them in certain ways because...
I want to stick a pin there. In regards to when you look at the data internationally as compared to local, do you see any trends?
So I always encourage clients to look at international data because this is where you can see where industries, how they're emerging, how customer preferences are shifting. So for example, what we're noticing now is that the medical and the beauty industries are quickly emerging or merging, and so clients who are entering that beauty space need to be aware of this. And rather than offer the same traditional services like getting your eyebrow tweezed, perhaps now somebody in the beauty space is looking at microblading or more fancier techniques that people are willing to spend more than $50 on a visit for. They're willing to spend $100 or $120, and these are quick certifications that you can get in something that's a little bit more on the medical side but still considered a beauty treatment.
Okay, so when you get to now the marketing plan, and so now this is your sales strategy and your marketing strategy. How do I let the public know about my product, my service? What's my audience type? How are you looking at the client? How are you looking at addressing that within the plan?
Well, you have the overall market of how many persons that exist. Then from there, you're not going to be able to serve the entire market.
Right.
So you got to scale it down. All right. How many persons you have access to in this particular market? You scale it down from there, and then even from there, how many persons out of who you have access to would even patronize your company? And then you have more realistic numbers in regards to potential persons who are within your touch points of how you deliver your products, service, or information, whatever it is that you're doing. However, what I've also discovered is we're now in a very interesting time. And what I mean by that is, the access to the internet and technology allows us to reach a number of persons even if they're not in a physical close proximity. In some cases, persons can order your product and they don't even have to be in the same country as you. They can patronize your service and you can kind of connect with them over Zoom and that kind of stuff. So I think what we have to keep in consideration is when you look at the market for the most part and you define that market, you don't want to be too restrictive, but at the same time, you don't want to be too open, too broad, where the numbers, because as mentioned before in the channel, all of your financial numbers are going to come from your sales projections. All of your numbers are going to come from how big the market is and potentially the growth part of the sales projections over the period of time.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about more specifically is the total addressable market versus
Correct.
the total serviceable market, which is different.
Yeah.
So you're talking about sort of this wide casting net versus niching down, like we talked about earlier.
So how does someone address that? How does someone differentiate whether, again, let's look at the international person trying to do business in the Bahamas. How do they get that information to really differentiate between the two? What if I'm, again, in this country, but I'm looking at an industry I've never been in before?
Right.
How are they getting that information?
Well, I guess it depends on the jurisdiction you go in, right? But if we localize it to the Bahamas, then it'll be places like, your government agencies that may have information like Nathaniel alluded to. And it could simply be information that you may find from the US that may be somewhat applicable. Because I think like what I've found, for example, is you'll have information that you can readily get on the Bahamas, but to a greater extent, you can't find a lot of information. So you have to kind of take an approach to go and sort of guerrilla it out and go and get surveys, right?
Yeah.
But then you also have to now apply, you have to rest on top of the data from a different jurisdiction that may be similar in terms of proximity and culture, similarly, and then apply it to the Bahamas and say, okay, what's the probability of this happening? You have to kind of make some guesses about it because that's just the reality. You would go on the internet right now and you would try to find information, statistics to support your marketing plan, support your business completely, and it'll be hard to find that information.
So just because I know some people may be confused about what we're talking about, I want to ask the question, what is the difference between a marketing plan versus an advertising plan? Because a lot of people use those words interchangeably,
Yeah.
marketing and advertising.
Who wants to take it? Nobody?
No, your topic, what's the difference?
Well, I'll say this with the marketing plan. It's just more so with the advertising plan, rather. You're communicating your value to the market that you want to address. That has nothing to do with the size, the demographics, the psychographics, even just the sheer numbers of persons in that market. And to your point, you made a point earlier in regards to is it the same approach for international persons coming into the Bahamas, or is it for a local person trying to start a business in the Bahamas? What I've discovered is if you're small, try to focus on a niche market and try to become number one in that niche market before you take on other markets that also may be niche instead of going mainstream. You go mainstream, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because even though we're writing plans, one of the things I appreciate about this conversation, we're writing productive plans that can be implemented. You don't want to write a plan that you cannot execute. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I agree with your point in regards to marketing, advertising, and even sales. I will even throw inside that as well. We use them interchangeably, but they are three distinctly different items.
And I think what's important to note here, we'd be remiss if we don't mention these things. So when we talk about marketing generally, we cannot forget to mention the 5 Ps.
Exactly.
Yes.
Product, price, place, promotion, and people. And I think marketing and advertising encompasses all of that, right? And I think as the audience members, entrepreneurs think about their business plan, think about marketing, you have to address those 5 P's.
Exactly.
That's how you run your marketing plan, but your business is based on those 5 P's as well.
So you mentioned place being one of the components of the 5 P's. Do you think, though, that you should have a separate section in your business plan for distribution channel and export potential?
100%.
But listen to me. If you don't have the distribution channels in your plan, then for me, I don't consider it a plan. Because when it comes down to sales, how are you going to distribute this product? How are you going to distribute this service? And if you haven't thought that through, that tells me that you have an incomplete plan. Because there are some variable expenses that are also attached to that as well.
Exactly.
So your profit and your net profit and your growth, that's off.
Agreed. And so for the listener, a business plan is not a novel. It's not something you just pick up and read for entertainment. It's something that is actionable. It's actionable. It's not something that just sits there and you pick it up for entertainment.
Yeah.
It must be something that can be actioned. So all of those areas we discussed and we will discuss have to be in it. So if you're selling ice cream, a distribution channel structure is critical there. How are you going to get it to the company that's going to get it to all of the retailers? How is that going to, same for your juice company, and similar, even if you are doing a manufacturing company, how are you going to get the aggregates? How are you going to craft this? So you need a strategic plan when it comes to how you handle your operations. And so then how are you going to distribute it to the market? And especially with a country such as the Bahamas where we're trying to export, we're trying to do that more, how are you going to get it from point A to point B to the end customer is critical. And that has to be a section, especially if you're exporting or to the other islands.
Exactly.
It has to be there and it's critical.
Exactly.
Is it going to be in the mailboat? Is it going to be on the plane?
Yep.
How are you going to handle that? And so that, I think that's a very good question. How do you handle it, Phyllice?
Well, I even wanted to go back to, I think you and I had an experience with a client wanting to sell a frozen dessert and distribute it on the Family Islands, but then realizing that the mailboat service that they wanted to use did not even have the capacity to keep these items frozen.
Exactly.
And so, it's a very critical thing to be in your plan to talk about how you're going to distribute products, especially when you're talking about branching away from New Providence into the Family Islands or even overseas. So it really requires a lot of considerations around packaging.
No, because I listen and I'm reflecting on different scenarios with clients where these are deal breakers. These are deal breakers.
Distribution channel is a big deal breaker.
And you look at revenue, that all affects that. So you're saying, I'm going to get this amount of my revenue from Eleuthera, I'm going to get this amount from Abaco. But if the mailboat, who may be able to carry it there, if they only have a certain amount of capacity, then your revenue projection is impossible to really achieve.
Exactly.
If they could only hold 2 pallets, best case scenario for your items, but your revenue is based on 8 pallets, then your numbers are immediately incorrect and cannot be used. And so all of that is, so I know for the listener, I know we're on one section, but talking about other sections, is because they all work together.
Yeah.
All of these, you can't market something that cannot be achieved. And then your audience will lose trust in you, or they will never develop that trust in you. And so you have to look at all of this as a full-on story when you're putting together these plans. So I think you were saying something, Nathaniel.
No, I'm in total agreement with you. I've had cases where a person's banking on a high season where they were doing more shipments, and then when the lull came in the year, then they reduced the shipments, and now it affected the business.
And I know we're extending a little longer than we planned to, because the episode is just a really strong episode. And so we'll hit the next 3 areas. Regulatory and legal won't be much, but for your company, especially for larger scale companies, if you don't have the regulatory side thought of, where we're talking about the environmental impact section or the health and safety sections, if you don't have those there, the feasibility studies you need, if you're dredging a barge or you're trying to build a dock, you have to have those there. And for me, if you're sending a plan to me to fund or for me to review, if I don't understand that you understand those steps needed to execute that, then I can't see this as a completed plan as well. And so the regulatory, legal also goes into ownership structure. Is this a sole proprietorship, limited liability company?
That's a whole different
Because I see a trend. I see a trend developing where you could have a business that is doing successful, right? And then they want to expand. and they want to bring in persons. So what you find persons would do is, okay, let's keep this as a separate entity. We're going to form a whole new company, put all the investors in that company, but we're going to run the original company as a separate company so they don't touch the revenue or the profits that are generated from the first company. I see, man, that's so common.
What's the buzzword now? SPV. Everybody wants SPV, which is a great tool that you should be aware of. But you have to understand when it's needed.
Yes.
And so some persons are coming with the SPV structure for a very small company. You don't need an SPV structure for a very small company. And so I agree with you. So what's your thoughts when you're crafting a plan? You're looking at the regulatory for a large scale company, small scale company. How are you helping your client to understand how that area should be
just
completed?
making sure that we capture everything that is needed, because some of these requirements do cost money as well. You know, the pre-requirements and also the requirements overall, and then also how to maintain it, because there are certain things that certain industries are required to do throughout the year as well. And just making the client aware, even though we're putting it in the plan, even though we're budgeting it in the plan, just be aware that these variables can also change, and you may have to pivot with the change as well.
Agreed.
I would say to entrepreneurs, I think when it comes to the regulatory framework related to your business, this is where you need to say to your consultant or ask them, do you have the regulatory expertise
Correct.
for this area? Because there are some consultants who will pass themselves off as being a master in all industries, where you may know a little about different industries, but this is where, as a client and a writer, you have to be honest in saying, you know what, I'm not an environmental expert. However, for this section of the plan, we may need to consult with someone who is, to make sure that this area of the plan is factually addressing what it is that you need.
Yeah, because I've had a situation where they change a structural part of the building that they wanted to build in the plan. Now we have to go right back through the Bahamas Investment Authority, all because of that change, which also triggered us having to go right to produce another environmental impact assessment.
And this all brings us to a good conversation we have: concessions. Right? When you're dealing with entrepreneurs, developing these businesses, how in the entrepreneur, you may be aware of a concession that they're not aware of. How do you get your clients to understand the concessions, get information from the concessions, just so they could get the best cost for their product? How do you look at that? Or is that simply the person trying to execute the business needs to do that research? They need to go into that government industry to get the information, that ministry to get the information. How do you handle that?
There are certain aspects of research that I prefer that the clients do themselves, because it's their learning experience.
Correct.
So even if I may know the information, I would say to them, okay, so if you're going to bring in these items, how much concession are you going to get? A lot of times, the question I ask, I know the answer, but I know the entrepreneur doesn't know. So they go off and they do their research, and they may learn something else that I didn't even ask them to look into. And so that is definitely an area where you want your clients to collaborate with you in writing the plan. Because, and I find too, if you put them through the process of conducting the research, they tend to remember the information a little bit more than that scenario where you saw me trying to drill something in the client's head.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, and I'm thinking about it from someone who, is a potential investor, for example, right? It's great that, you have a consultant, and the consultant helps you to flesh out everything.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you go to make a pitch to an investor, it's you and the investor.
Exactly.
The consultant is not in there, right?
Exactly.
Unless they're a partner. But it's you. So you need to ensure, you the entrepreneur need to ensure that you have knowledge of the information. What is the policy on concessions, right? Do you get 25%, 10%, no percent? What is that, right? What are the various aspects of policy, right, that impact your business, right? What's the schedule of different fees? All these different things you want to make sure you know. So I really believe that it's important that as you flesh out your business plans, particularly this area, because this can make or break a business, right?
Agreed.
The government, in all of their greatness, can decide that they want to, increase duty for a particular item that you're bringing in to 150%, then what do you do? Do you still have a business, right? So you need to have an understanding of that. You need to keep abreast of those things, in my opinion.
Also, I think I like when you said this is what can make or break your business. Like a lot of times we compete based on pricing or product innovation, but we don't as entrepreneurs compete based on expertise.
Right, correct.
Do I know my industry better than my competitor?
Correct, right.
Do I know all of the concessions better than my competitor? And taking advantage in order to be able to offer more competitive pricing,
Right,
and whatever.
And I think, and just to make a point here, so the regulatory framework that we're talking about can serve as a moat for that business.
Correct.
Right? So and what a moat is simply, I guess you can call it a wall, like a defense mechanism to protect your business, to insulate it from external factors, right? And if you have a thorough understanding of that, right? And if your business is existing or it gets to a point where it has influence, right?
Exactly.
Then you are in a totally different ball game to be able
Exactly.
to succeed in your business.
A good example is the solar industry. You have a lot of persons trying to put solar in different islands, and there are different levels of expertise. Some market better than others, and some of the best don't market at all. And so you have to, you have to understand how better you as an entrepreneur need to strive to be the best in your field. Because simply being the best in solar will then carry you further. So you're not only doing houses now, you begin doing commercial buildings.
Right.
And then after that, at some point, you're doing large scale businesses.
Correct.
So the expertise is critical. And some persons talk a good game, got the best shirts, but they actually, but they can't really, they don't have the certifications others have. They haven't done the research.
So it brings me to this point, the competitive advantage. How do you put your company in the best situation or increase the level of competitive advantage compared to your customers? Or not your customers, your competitors. Because I think sometimes we'll get lost in the plan writing is we don't differentiate ourselves from everybody else. Yeah. We're writing literally, you take that same plan, take the name off it, put another name on it, and it's almost like it's serving the market for the most part. But to your point, what does the entrepreneur needs to do to become competitively different? And to your point, creating now moats. I don't think most persons even have in their mind, okay, what can I put in place that could separate me from everybody else, which will make them or take them a little long to learn, or it's just one of those things that they would never be able to add to the company, which will give me the longevity in the space.
Yeah. So how are we addressing that competitive advantage? When you're looking at an entrepreneur, what should they be thinking about when they're because some of the listeners may write the plan themselves.
Yeah.
What should they be thinking about when they're thinking about the competitive advantage that their company needs to have over their competitors?
I think you should start with to what we discussed earlier, having a full knowledge of the market, having a full knowledge of the customer, and trying to outlearn everybody else. You understand what I'm saying? Because once you're in that position, say, okay, I understand the industry is headed in this direction. Like take, for example, we were talking about earlier about makeup and hair. So you have from persons who can style, for persons who could do hair care. And with that being said, there are some persons who, lean to one side. The other person leans to the other side. But I am saying focus on both. And then look in the market. Do you want to just focus on children? Yeah. Learn everything about them. Do you want to focus on adults? Do you want to focus on persons who are losing their hair? And get the certifications. And once you have all of that in place, then now you have that distinction. You don't even have to market at that point. You can just get it from referrals.
So I know a little more of what you said just now. that specific example, and that took a company from about to close. Mm-hmm. When you gave that client that advice to them being a successful business to this day, literally for that shift in advice. Yeah, so I just wanted to shift the conversation a little bit to products and services, and then we go into the fun part of financials. When it comes to products and services, a client comes to you simple. Usually they know what they would like to offer to the market, but then really itemizing that and structuring it. How do you help clients with that? How should they think about that process? So Phyllice.
So for me, I tend to keep things very simple. Tell me what are your top 5 selling products or services. I like to know what is the main revenue generators for this business. So if a client can only tell me about 1 or maybe 2 products, then my automatic thing in terms of expansion is how are you going to expand on this product line in the future? Is that part of your expansion strategy? But if they're already there in terms of 3 to 5 main products, then the question is, how are these products different? One, different and better. Two, because you could be different, but you don't necessarily have to be better.
That's true.
Right? And so, you know, that is where we get into starting to lead into the competitor analysis, because I need to know if it's different and if it's better. Also, in terms of describing your product, quality has to be a measurement in there. Also, accessibility to the product. So, is your product something whereby I have to come to your store between 9 to 5 to pick up your product? Okay, I work on Gladstone Road. If your product is Mackey Street, you're not going to see me. And maybe everybody else who working in that particular area when you take into consideration traffic. So when we're talking about product, how accessible is this product? Can I purchase it online if it's that kind of product? Or do you offer delivery services?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm sorry, but I have that built into a number of products that I buy, whereby they would charge me a $10 delivery fee. And they would say, well, wherever you are, we'll bring it to your work, we'll bring it to your home. If you want us to bring it to church, no, I don't do business on Sabbath. But I mean, they make it very accessible in terms of the product. So we tend to go into that, you know, discussion in terms of convenience, quality, pricing when we're talking about it.
So listener, our videography team and our producers nodded their head the entire time for this section. So accessibility is critical when you are looking at putting your plan together, creating your business and executing it. Everyone is thinking about that when they're buying your services. I want to shift to the financial section. This is the section that we all specialize in. A section, do we have time? I don't know, but we will do our best. But I'll say this is a section that we know has been one of the most difficult for entrepreneurs, whether they're skilled in the industry specifically, not skilled in the industry. But I think the easiest way to start this conversation off is use of proceeds. That's a very simple structure, but I get it wrong 80% of the time when persons bring me a plan. And so when you look at use of proceeds, simple. The items you need to buy, the pricing attached to it, the quantity if that's necessary, as well as, is another piece I'm missing when it comes to it, when it will start sometimes. So not all businesses need that. Some will do it all at the same time. Oh, working capital. That's what I missed. How much working capital? So if you're getting staff, is this 3 months worth of staff working capital? If this is utilities, how much utilities is it? 3 months, 6 months? I've had some persons bring utilities for 2 years. They say, hey, this plan shows 2 years. No, nobody's going to fund you 2 years of utilities. They're not going to give you a year of utilities. And so the average I use is three months the most when it comes to those. And so, Phyllice, I could see you want to say something.
Yeah. For me, what I've been seeing a lot of lately is that use of funds literally doesn't add up. Because that is the section of the plan that probably changes the most. And someone forgets to go back and actually calculate if all of those numbers add to a particular thing. And oftentimes it doesn't. And I'm shocked, like nobody bothered to recalculate this. And so you have to be extremely meticulous, yes, in itemizing all of what you need, putting the numbers there, but make sure that the numbers add up, because that's already a signal, okay, if y'all ain't...
If this is wrong,
This is what you
you don't need to go through the rest of the plan.
So then we go into the next after the use of proceeds. I'm looking at the ask. Usually that's, I want to raise $100,000, I want to raise $50 million, I want it to be a debt structure at an interest rate based on 8%, 10-year term. Jarrell, when you're looking at that section,
No, hold on, but before you get there, working up the working capital. I don't want to
please,
because you're going to need working capital. I've seen entrepreneurs who will focus on the acts in regards to the products or items that they need to get started, right, to get funded, but they will skip the working capital part. and then want to launch straight into the business, and within the first, remember now, you're not getting revenue sometimes on day one. You're not going to get it in a lot of cases on day one. And so do you have enough to keep you afloat, which will now add to the conversation in regards to acts. So now you know how much to go for and ask for.
But the question of working capital, for most traditional banks, they lend money for things that they can
Correct.
collateralize.
Correct.
So
That's a very good point.
how much can you ask for in working capital if you're looking at traditional banks as your source of funding? Also, I think when you're looking at use of funds, if even if I was looking at it from an investor point of view, I would look to see, is most of the funding going towards items that are going to help you generate sales?
Correct.
So if most of your items are going towards
Office decor.
office decor, but you're not actually purchasing equipment
Yeah.
or investing in technology or things that's actually going to accelerate how quickly you produce and sell these products.
So no, you made a very valid point, and I totally agree. Of being confronted with now trying to raise this money, and you're going through traditional means, and so now it brings into question, okay, how do you create the mix? How much of it's going to be equity? How much of it is going to be debt? And then also you have to take into consideration some entrepreneurs have their own preference. No, I don't want to know anybody else in this business. I'll be doing strictly debt, or I want equity. I don't want to go to the bank. But sometimes, depending on the nature of the business and what all you're trying to do in the business, you may need a combination of both in order for it to work.
And so for our listener, we have an episode coming out shortly dedicated to raising capital and how you're supposed to do that. And so that's what Phyllice is speaking about. And when you're putting together your use of proceeds section and your financing requests, all of that needs to intertwine, because you're going to have to put your working capital there. But at times you're going to have to split that and say, owner handles the working capital, and then the other items the funder will execute. Now, if your plan is a plan not being funded, you're just having an operational plan, you have all those things there, but you don't have to worry about what the funder has to do, because this is an operational plan. And so it goes back to our original point of knowing what your plan is for, knowing who your audience is. But for sure, if you're going to a commercial bank, they're not touching that working capital. No. They're not touching that. That's going to have to be equity provided, or you have to put that up as down payment. You have to. And so that is very important when you're putting your plan to. Who are you presenting this to? If you're providing this to a straight up equity provider, they may be interested in doing that. But again, you have to know your audience and understand what they're looking for.
So look, Nick, even on that same point, whether you're approaching an investor or a lender, what would be your advice to entrepreneurs in terms of how much of their own skin in the game they're putting towards this use of funds?
At minimum, you want to be looking at 10%. You would like to, but again, it's relative. And so for the listener, I'll be correct. It's still relative. If you're starting a casino for a hotel casino, $100 million, you can't show up with a $10,000 plan and say that's suffice. But you also may not have 80 million or whatever, 70% of that. But I'll recommend, depending on the business, some businesses go up to 50%. Some people want you to have 50% down. So again, depends on the industry and whichever consultant you're working with, or whether it's yourself, if you have to have the expertise to understand the type of market you're dealing with. If it's a heavy service-based company that doesn't have a lot of assets to hold, you can't go to the commercial banks. It'll be very difficult unless you get a consumer loan. And so you may have to come up with all of the money. And so it really does depend. And I think that's a question for everyone. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, we have a dilemma in our country, because you hit the nail on the head to a point that was said earlier. We have a lot of service-based companies in a country where capital is not easily acquired. And if it is acquired, then how much the cost of the capital? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we could dive so much into that at a later date, I'm assuming.
All right, so guys, now we're going to talk about financial statements, right? This is pretty much the heartbeat of the company, right? And so walk us through how you guys approach tackling the financial statements with clients. Just high level, just by talking about, what they are, cash flow, income statement, balance sheet. Just high level, how you guys approach addressing that and the importance of it to the business plan.
So for me, I start a client off with the profit and loss statement. Some people know it as income statement. And it's just sitting down with them, getting a clear understanding of how many products you're selling per month, what is the average price per product, knowing the peak months, the slow months, also sitting with them, working through all of their costs and expenses. And I would say that's where we spend the most time when we look at a profit and loss,
Right.
is really helping them identify all of their fixed and variable costs. Once we've moved on from the profit and loss statement, I work with them on a common size statement. If someone's not familiar with what that is, it basically puts all of your costs and expenses as percentages of sales. So if in a particular month I see your labor is 20% of sales, and then 3 months later I see it's 40% of sales, I automatically start asking questions. What's happening in that third month? Is it that, the administrative staff is just giving themselves salary increases?
Yeah.
But then my question is, okay, that's fine, but what impact is that having on your
Correct.
sales?
Correct.
So that is where I really spend a lot of time after the profit and loss, looking at the common size statement. Once I'm sure that they're not large deviations in those percentages, whether as the business is growing, then we move on to the balance sheet cash flow statement. Particularly for a startup or even an existing business that's expanding, it's wise to have a monthly cash flow statement.
Correct.
Because during that growth or launch period, there could be some months where your business could actually be at a negative
Correct.
cash position, and so we have to then go back to the profit and loss statement and figure out, okay, is it a matter of you need to be a little bit more aggressive with your sales, or you need to be more conservative with your costs and expenses? Maybe from the onset we need to look at bulk purchasing, so that you're coming in at a low cost
offset
point.
the cost.
Exactly. Or maybe you need some investors to, if you're getting investor money, perhaps there should be a phased approach so that you get those investor injections in those months where the business needs the cash the most.
Yeah.
Also, financial ratios. I mean,
very
you need the ratios to tell you what the net profit margins are, the gross profit margins, what your cash burn rate is. If you're selling products, what's your inventory turnover? You need to see your return on assets, return on equity. These terms may sound like it's foreign, but this is what an investor lender is really looking. They're taking all of your business plan and looking at your ratios,
Through that
almost
lens.
like the doctor would look at your lab readings.
Correct.
This is how they read the viability
That's a
of your
great
business with those ratios, and you have to have notes to the financials. You
Excellent.
can't just have these numbers and nobody know
How.
what you was how
How you
yeah
get-
how
how you
what's your
arrive at these
assumptions.
things, yeah.
So explain just quickly, what are the notes to the notes for the financial statements?
So the
And
notes,
also the assumptions as well.
Yes.
but I've been talking for a little while, but basically you have to go from A to Z and say the assumption is that this business is going to be launched on this date. The assumption is that these are the products that you're going to offer. The assumption is we're going to hire these employees and this is when we're going to hire them.
These are the operating
Exactly. The assumption is that the business is going to have a business bank account that's going to incur these type of service charges. So if you have a system whereby you're charging your clients or you're accepting payments through credit card means, you have to say that, hey, we're going to have a merchant account. So somebody can go to your financials and see, okay, with your buying service charges, does this look reasonable for a business that's maybe 80% driven based on credit card, debit card transactions? And you have to include in there your business license percentages that are taken into consideration. For example, if your business is generating under 500,000, then it's 0.5% of sales. If it's more than that, so you have to have every assumption that's there, because maybe in the first year it's 0.5% of sales in the second year. Because of your income that's being generated, it's now 0.75%. So everything has to be spelled out A to Z. I would say on average, if I'm writing assumptions to just the profit and loss, that could be 2.5 pages just of assumptions.
I've seen it in real life. It is definitely that long. So for our listener, the income statement, balance sheet, cash flow are critical. Most commercial banks aren't looking at the cash flow statement, but you as an entrepreneur should want to look at that cash flow statement. And as Phyllice said, monthly. At least for your first year, you would like that to be monthly because it allows you to understand your business between you get into those annuals. And so I'll give an example. Month 1, you may put a down payment on a machine that won't arrive until month 6. So you're not going to start generating money until month 8, because when it arrives month 6, you then have to clear it, and so you have to do conservatively month 8. Do you have enough working capital to carry you during that time period? But the loan you got, they give you only a 3-month grace, and so now you have to start paying money at month 3, but you haven't received the item till month 6, and you actually can't utilize it till month 8. And so that first year, for you to really understand yourself, that monthly financial statements are imperative to carry you through. You find a lot of companies who they start off great, and by month 3, 4, they're just burning, and they're, where's the cash? And then their financials are looking at arrears. And so it's very important to look at your financial statements, keeping your revenue conservative. I know entrepreneurs dislike conservative revenue figures, but I promise you it's better to under promise and over deliver. And so you have to do that. When it comes to the expense side, you simply have to be conservative. Make your expenses a little higher, project it a little higher, just so you can be, we're pretty much doing your sensitivity analysis to understand what happens under different scenarios as well. And so your financial statements, you have to address them all. You have to look at them. And I know when you're looking at your plan at nighttime, you feel low when the numbers aren't as good as you want them to be. But that's the reality, because there may be a day when it is structured like that.
I'm glad you're saying this, because then, going back to the beginning, should the business plan be written based on the best case scenario or the worst case scenario?
Too good. To those.
No, it should be written depending on who it's going to. Most plans, if it's not going external, right, you could write it on the best case scenario. But if it's going external, you need to be conservative. You really need to be conservative, because at the end of the day, you have to, if it's a loan, you got to be able to service that loan. If it is an investor, then you have to be able to show where you can make returns to them. If it's just for an expansion standpoint, yes, we love to be optimistic, but there's sometimes certain realities where certain things kick into place, and now you're not achieving those numbers that you set out to be. So I think it depends on who we're going to, but you got to be conservative.
There's actually a plan called worst case scenario plan, where it just shows literally your worst case, and everyone, especially if you're putting in a lot of money, and a lot of money is relative. Someone could be borrowing $5,000, and that may seem small to a lot of persons, but that loan could be devastating for others. I've met with persons who have taken on only a $5,000 loan, and they couldn't service it. It was about maybe $80 to $100 a month, and they had to go get a full-time job to cover that $80 to $100. And so it's all relative. And so you have to look at that worst case scenario. You may not present that, but you as an entrepreneur taking on money, whether it's debt or equity, need to look at that worst case scenario and be able to understand, if I get to this point, how can we make it through?
Nick, I always write based on the worst case.
I've seen the plans.
If a client tells
It's
me
very
they
detailed.
if they could sell 100, we're going to slice that down to the bare minimum, because then I know, and I say it to the client, if your business can survive based on you selling 20 products a month, even though you say you could sell 100, then we good.
So I agree with you completely. And so entrepreneurs, break-even analysis is critical. Understand exactly how you break even, the amount that you need to sell at what price point to get it done is very important. And so generally we've gone over the area and the main components of a business plan. We could spend an entire episode on the financial statements, walking you through it, but it's critical for you as an entrepreneur to look at these things and take those into account. And so before we close, are there any tips and tricks that do you have for persons when they're putting together their business plan, no matter which stage? Do you have any tips and tricks to look at? One is a running joke, waste management for me. If someone doesn't have waste management in their plan, I'm not looking at it. So if you are a restaurant, you have a higher amount of waste management than if someone has a service-based business at home. And the restaurant has a lower, they have a different type of waste management than a medical facility. And so all of them have differences. And so when I see a plan, if you haven't taken into account those smaller metrics, then I can't trust you to handle the larger metrics. And so whether it's yourself or whether it's a consultant, they have to be detailed enough to go into all of the numbers. But any other tips and tricks that you have, or maybe an online platform persons use. I know persons use Live Plan sometimes to create business plans. Phyllice is not the biggest fan of Live Plan. She prefers the Excel sheet directly, which is my preference as well. For smaller business, I'll use Live Plan. For businesses that have more nuance, I'm using my Excel sheet. And so, exactly.
Yeah.
And so please, any other tips and tricks that you have, thoughts or experiences or don'ts, things you don't do at all?
Before running a plan, do a lot of research, right? Know everything about your industry, know everything it is about the customers you're serving or you're hoping to serve. I think you should also appreciate that a business plan is an art and a science. Therefore, it's probably in your best interest to work with a consultant who knows how to merge those two worlds, best represent your business, get the plan written in a short period of time. It doesn't have to be this long, drawn-out process.
That's true.
If you're coming with all of your research already done, I don't see any reason why a plan can't be written in 2 to 3 days, to be very honest. Also, the last tip I'll offer for your use of funds, do not just pick arbitrary numbers out of the sky. Get actual vendor invoices and quotes. Make sure you include your landed costs in there.
Correct.
To make sure that what you're asking for in funding is actually what you need.
No, I agree with everyone. I would say just, make sure you have all of the supporting documents to validate everything you're saying in the plan. Because persons want to check. And if they find that certain areas are off, then, they can't trust the integrity of the plan in itself. And if you're going to an advisor or a consultant, find out if they've written plans in that industry before as well. And how many of those plans got funding. Because at the same time, you also want to look at the track record of the person who you're using as the service provider. And then last but not least, I would say the most critical thing is the note section of the financials. Make sure you have an understanding of what all needs to happen in order to achieve the end results, which you're seeing that is going to happen in the plan, and be able to talk about it when somebody asks you those questions.
Excellent. Drew?
Yeah, tips and tricks, to me, just boils down to work, right? So you have an idea, you're an entrepreneur, someone that wants to go into business, and you have to get a plan done. It's going to take work. So, I don't want the audience to be mistaken or to think that there's a way to get around it. Because even if you work with a consultant, they're going to add immense amounts of value, but the way the relationship works best is when that individual who needs that plan for that idea they want is driven, they're passionate, and they can get beyond the hurdles, beyond the questions that'll be asked during the process. And that's why you have persons like Phyllice and persons like Nathaniel, Nick, myself, who obviously can lend a hand to that. But what I really want to kind of, end with is just saying that when you have this idea, make sure that you define what the problem is. Make sure that you do your research to understand what the sort of value is that the problem presents to you and also to the person whose problem you're going to be solving. And then make sure that you do the due diligence to really sift through and go through all the other parts of the plan, the marketing, the 5 Ps we talked about. Just really come with a holistic plan. And again, remember, the business plan is an investment. It's your first investment into the idea that you believe will not only change your life, but will change the lives of the persons that benefit from the product you offer to the market.
Excellent. And so to our listener, thank you for tuning into this episode of Mastering Finance, where we discuss creating a great business plan. So Nathaniel and Phyllice, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
This is the first time we've had 2 guests on because this topic is so monumental and it's so expansive. We appreciate your time and your expertise. And enjoy your day. And thank you. Tune in for the other episodes.